Okay, for today we would be discussing about ABAP objects, that is nothing but ABAP oops. Yeah, what is object-oriented programming? Features of object-oriented programming, components of class and methods. So we would be discussing about, the different features of the ABAP oops whenever the requirement comes. Just like whenever we are trying to work with the Genil, what are all the oops concept that we needed, we would be discussing at that time, and we would be running with our web UI. So basically, what is object-oriented programming? Object-oriented programming is a combination of data and functions to operate on that data in a single unit. Such a unit is called object. See here, object-oriented programming contains data and functions. So we would be playing with manipulation of data through the functions. That is also called methods. Excuse me. That's about the object. What is, see, the term object-oriented programming. So the programming which is oriented on object. So everything revolves around the object. So in object-oriented programming, every data will reside in an object only, and an object will be speaking with another object. The object will be inheriting other object. So as we have seen, if we remember, Genil object model contains group of objects with a relationship. And if you remember, the relationships are three types. Association is more like a friendly kind of stuff. So aggregation, yes, whenever needed we would be calling that another object, or if we are not in need, yeah, we would not be calling that object. And composition, so the object of child should exist with the parent, otherwise the parent object will not exist. So in object-oriented programming, object is having always relationship with the other object. So what is the purpose of that? For data collection, to get a required data. For this purpose, yeah, we would be using object-oriented programming. The other term, let's see, object has state and behavior. See, so object will have state as well as behavior. State is nothing but identity. That identity is provided when the respective object is got memory allocation. See, there is when we discuss about object-oriented programming, there are two terms that will be coming into the picture. Those are class and object. So we might have seen class is a template, class is a blueprint of object, object is a real-time entity. In a class we would be defining how the object should be, like what are all the data that it should contain, what are all the function it should do, functions in a form of methods, in a form of attributes. So class should contain attributes as well as methods to perform whatever the service that it has to provide. Then what is an object? So when this class gets instantiated, that instantiated one is called object. So in a real time, the data is contained in the object, not a class. Now here we have seen a statement, object has state and behavior. Means we can see the physical appearance of an object that's in a memory, and it behaves. So since it has a functions where the behavior of the object has been defined. So this is one way. If we are going into the another way, object has a state, means memory, or its identity. It has a physical appearance. So who would be providing the physical appearance to the object? So any inputs from your side? Rishi? Vinay? Who would be providing state for an object?
We have to create, right? At runtime, we have to create an object using create object statement.
Absolutely, you are right. But so we are writing the statement create object, but there is the other one which is responsible to create an object, to provide a state of an object. That is nothing but a constructor. See the name constructor, it constructs. So constructor provides state of an object. The state of an object is determined by the constructor. But when we are coding, we are not bothered about the constructor, how the constructor is and how it is providing the state. But ABAP runtime will create its own defaulted constructor, and when we try to create an object, create object means it calls the default constructor. That default constructor provides state for an object. That is nothing but it provides some memory to the object with a reference. Okay. So object has state. State is provided by the constructor, and behavior is provided by the methods in an object.
But Devinder, this constructor itself is also like a method, right? When we instantiate, that constructor will get triggered. It depends, like if it is a static method, it will trigger once. If it is a normal constructor, then it will trigger for each and every instance of a object. So, it's also a method, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Constructor is also method, but the functionality of a constructor, is to allocate a memory to the object and to provide a state for an object. That's nothing but provide a memory to an object. So
fine, but what if I don't have a constructor in my class? I can have a class without a constructor, right?
Yeah. That's what the another statement I have provided. That is, if you are not providing a constructor, then ABAP runtime will create its own constructor. That is called a defaulted constructor. With that defaulted constructor, when you provide a statement like create object, that calls the defaulted constructor, and based on the defaulted constructor, it will create the object.
Okay.
Yeah. That's why the statement object has state and behavior. State is provided by the constructor because there should be a memory. The object has an identity. Identity is nothing but a reference. So object has an identity. That identity is provided by the constructor, and the behavior is provided by the functions. Rishi, are you with me, or I'm going beyond the concepts that you have? Okay, no problem. So that's about the object-oriented programming. Generalized way, features of object-oriented programming. As we know, abstraction, encapsulation, inheritance, polymorphism. Abstraction. So what we are trying to abstract? We are trying to abstract the data. We are trying to abstract the behavior. Generally, for children, we would say when we go to the other, our friend's home or somebody's home, generalized way, like we would say to our children, hey, don't do like that. So we are abstracting his behavior. Okay. If you go there, just keep quiet and sit there. Generally, that is for our generation, not for the current generation kids. So here, through the abstraction, we are trying to hide the data which is not secured, which is not good to the other object, and we are abstracting the data which is not necessary to publish it. So just for the YouTubes, what I am doing, just I am putting it as a private, so that only you too can access the data, the recordings, not others. So what I am doing, I am abstracting that. So in an object-oriented programming, you have a feature where you can abstract the data. You can put data or method as a public, so that it will be visible for everybody. Everybody can use that one, or you can put it as a private, so that nobody can access it. You can put it as a protected. Protected means just to whom you have if you want to give the permissions, yes, for those persons that respective data or methods are visible. See, public means everybody can access it. Private means that is private to that respective class only. Protected, yes, that is accessible with a permission. That permission should be, that is nothing but it should be inherited. The class which inherits it, that only can have a access to those data and methods. Okay, next, encapsulation. Other beautiful feature provided by the object-oriented programming. We want a final data. So as an object, we are one object and we want to communicate with the other object to get some data. And I don't want what the data is processing. I want a final result, something like I want a sales order details. How you are manipulating, it's none of my job. So that is encapsulated in that object. So how it is retrieving the sales order data. So from the other object's perspective, yeah, it goes there, gets the sales order details, that's all. So here what the other object is doing, it is encapsulating the complete data and logic in it. So how it is processing and how it is connecting to the some RFC, or it is calling the function module, whatever, yeah, the other object will not know about that. So that is nothing but encapsulation. The general example that would be provided in most of the forums or in the textbooks is a car. So if we are trying to change the gear of a car, there are a lot of things which are happening underneath the machines, but on a higher level, just we are changing the gear level. So just we are using the encapsulation, just changing that will work for us. In the same way, object-oriented programming contains a data and a logic, but that is encapsulated. So we would be just using whatever the necessity information that we need. That's an encapsulation. Inheritance, yeah. Inheritance nothing but acquiring a data or methods from a superclass. Generally like a parent and child relationship, super and sub. So whatever the superclass methods and attributes are there, that will be inherited to the subclass, and note like private will not be accessed. Private attributes, private methods will not get inherited because private is an abstraction by which we are abstracting those respective data and methods to its own class, not to the other classes. So the major discussion come with the inheritance is single level inheritance and multiple inheritance. What is the difference between C++ language inheritance and Java, .NET, ABAP inheritance? Any idea?
Yeah, this is Vinay. Oops ABAP doesn't support this multiple inheritance, whereas I believe Java, .NET, they support this multiple inheritance.
Yes, Vinay, that's right. But if I say yes, it supports multiple inheritance, then what do you say?
In ABAP,
Yeah.
Oops ABAP?
Yeah.
I mean, you might be taking one interface and one class that you might.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. That's the answer. That's the answer. So ABAP language, in ABAP or Java language, generally we will be inheriting only a single class. We will not be able to inherit multiple classes. But to facilitate that, these languages came up with the interface through which I can inherit multiple classes. So multiple inheritance is possible with the interfaces ABAP or these Java, .NET or ABAP languages. Anyhow, we will see in an example like how the inheritance is, how we will be doing some, multiple inheritance is possible with the object-oriented programming. Final one is polymorphism. Just a name sense with the same name, and I would be doing multitasking. So in a polymorphism, general features are method overloading and method overriding. So method overloading is nothing but with the same method name I would be performing multiple tasks. For example, account creation with the name account create account is the name of the method. With that name I will try to create an account for a customer. I would try to create account for an organization. I would try to create account for a group of people. So with the same name of a method, create account, we would be trying to perform different tasks. That's nothing but a polymorphism. So these are all the features of an object-oriented program: abstraction, encapsulation, inheritance, and polymorphism. Okay. Any questions on these features of object-oriented programming?
No questions from my end.
Yeah, it's a bit theoretical, but yeah, we cannot avoid this. I feel at least the people who are having object-oriented programming knowledge, they can just refresh these stuffs, or may get some one or two new concepts that they might not know. Now I am moving ahead. Abstraction. As we discussed, abstraction, we are abstracting the data or the methods by putting its visibility as a public section, protected section, and private section with the same line. Public section is visible to everybody. Protected section, yes, it is visible to the children of the class, not to others. And private, yes, that is meant only for the class itself. Component placed here are accessible by the class itself. So it should be pretty clear to you all. And what are all the components of the class? So if we want to create a class, yeah, what are all the things basically class contains? Class contains attributes and methods. Excuse me. As I told you earlier, object, there is nothing but class. Based on the class, object has been created, and object contains data and methods. Here for data storage, we would be creating attributes in a class. So any data constants will be determined as a attributes in a class. So we have a data, and that data should be processed, manipulated based on the logic that we needed. So that is done in a method. So it's a block of code which plays with the data, so which manipulates the data. And yes, for basic ABAP, they can compare it with a function module where there are few input parameters and export parameters. So mostly method will take some values from others, like it has some input parameter, it processes it, it returns, or it exports a data. We will see while creating a methods what are all the ways to create a method. Events. So finally, events are also just like a method, but it is used for other mechanisms. A mechanism set within a class which can help a class to trigger methods of other classes. It's generalized. If you want to call a method of a other class, then we would be using events. In a real time, yes, we would be using events when a user performs some action, like he has clicked a button, yes, then an event should be raised. If he selected drop down content, So based on the selected drop-down content, we can raise an event in a generalized way. Like there are two drop-downs, one is for country, another is for state. Based on a selection of country, the state data should be refreshed. So for example, now in this example, when a user will try to select a country, based on the selection, an event should be raised. That event should be responsible to get the data in a state drop-down. So when we go through this web UI, we would be extensively using the event handlers. We would be discussing about what is the action, event handler, and how the flow goes at that time. Interface, yes. Interfaces are independent structures that you can implement in a class. Interface is not an object. To create an object for an interface should be implemented. We will see how in a real time what is an interface, how it is defined, and how a class implements those interfaces. So these are the components of the class, so mainly attributes and methods. What about the attributes? Attributes are internal data field within a class that can have ABAP data type. So always the attributes types are declared based on ABAP data types. And attributes are two types. One is instance attributes and static attributes. Instance attributes exist separately in each instance object of a class. Static attributes available once for each class. See here, the difference between instance attributes and static attribute is instance attribute exists separately in each class. If I have instantiated 10 classes, instance attributes are available as 10 attributes. So for each instance, attribute is determined and attribute has been stored in a memory. Whereas static attribute available once for each class. For example, just we have taken 10 objects. For those 10 objects, the instance attribute is separately allocated. But for those 10 instances, for those 10 objects, only one static attribute has been maintained. It's more like a global data. Okay? Are you with me? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, methods. Just to have an idea how the method works. See, in this diagram, we see some inbound arrows. So that is coming into the arrows as I and C. I means import parameters, C means change parameters. So import parameters are nothing but which provides some value to the method to manipulate some businesses or to manipulate some tasks. So it just provides the value and forget about everything. Whereas changing parameters, yes, it provides value to the method and it remains. If within the method, if we change its value, yeah, that changed value will be with the changing parameter. For example, if import parameter contains a value 10, it gives to the method and it vanishes. Whereas for a changing parameter, yes, if the value is 10, yes, fine. In a method, we have written some code to change its value to the 20, yes, fine. After the method, yes, the changing parameter can be accepted by some external methods or some external objects. So still changing parameter alive after execution of a method. Here, just an assumption. Export parameter, yes. Finally, through that method, some value will be exported in a form of some attributes or what we call export parameters. So there are 5 types of parameters that a method has. Sorry, 4 types of parameters. Import parameters, export parameters, changing parameters, and return parameters. Okay, there is a bit difference in a export parameter and return parameters. When we try to export group of data, bunch of data in a form of collection, we would be using export parameters. And if we want to return a single value, then we would be using return parameter. So, and exceptions. If some exceptions happens in the method, we would be handling with the exceptions. So here see, just what we need to know is a method contains import parameters, export parameters, changing parameters, and return parameters. Import parameters and change parameters are one which will be accepted before execution of first line of a method. So if we put a breakpoint at the first line and if we check the values of import and changing, yes, that will be accepted by the method. And after processing it, yes, we would be exporting export parameters as well as changing parameters. The other way is return parameters. Return parameter is also like an export parameter which exports, but it exports a single value. That's the difference between export and return. Yeah, that's more just an overview about object-oriented programming. Anyhow, we would be discussing when we try to perform some tasks in the Genil. Yes, we would be looking like what is a me and what is a super keywords. And when we try to create, yeah, we would be discussing about these are all the features of object-oriented programming. So this is a bit overview on a object-oriented programming. Then we will move to the how to create a class. And in Web UI, we would be always using global classes in a local class. Local class generally we would be writing in a report program. And global classes, yes, that would be available to everybody. So that can be reused every time, anytime. For that, now we will try to create a global class. Sharing is first. Just try to create a class. Just I am trying to log in into the system. See, test. So I went to the transaction SC24, create a global classes, and I have provided a class name as Z test ABAP oops 01. This doesn't work with us, and we need to create class with the name ZCL, so that system identifies this is a class, object oriented class. So we need to have ZCL while creating a class. Click on button create. We need to provide description. See here, class can be public, private, protected, and abstract. Abstract we will discuss. Private means that class will not be accessible anywhere. Protected, yes, can be inherited with the subclasses. Public, yes, the visibility is public. Abstract means just we are trying to abstract the object creation of that respective class. So we will not be able to instantiate that respective class. So whenever class is declared as abstract means we are abstracting the class to create its own object. That's the type of instantiation it has. So if the instantiation is public or private, protected or abstract. Just I am removing this final checkbox so that this class is not a final. It asked for request. Now I am trying to create a class. So just I have logged in. So I am trying to create a method. Just I will take simple example, addition of two numbers. Add as a method. And for method we would be providing the levels. Is it an instance method or static method? So instance method will be available for every object instantiation, and static method will be available for a class, irrespective of how many instances are created. It as instance method. Visibility, yes. The visibility of methods that we can have is public, protected, and private. If we put public, yes, it will be visible to other objects as well. Whereas protected, that will be available for subclasses only. If that is a private, that is private to this respective class only. Addition of two numbers. Mostly methods will have parameters. So here what I am doing, I want to pass the two numbers within a addition method, and addition should add it and should provide me the result. The generalized naming conventions for these will be I means input variable. I am providing two input variables, input parameters. IV, I stands for import, V variable param 1. Let's see what the type is. See, here we have 4 types. One is importing, exporting, changing, and returning. Now we want to import the value into the variable into this method. That's why. And the associated type, I am using it as an integer for simplicity. IV param2 just I am using export variable param. So I'm exporting only one value, the resulted one. So that's why not giving param 1 or 2. Just I'm giving EV param. See, for this method, there are two import parameters. Those are nothing but I stands for import, V for variable, param 1, IV param 2, and export parameter EV parameter. These are method parameters, and you don't confuse it with the attributes of a class. These are not the attributes of the class. These are parameters for a method. Just I'm coming back. So you can click on these button methods. You will be coming to the methods tab again. So to define a method, yes, since we have defined in this class, just double click on that. You will be able to enter into that method, and now you can write the code in that, because method does some processes with the data, with the parameters that it got, or with the attribute. See here, third, we are not able to see the signature. Signature is nothing but the import export parameters. So just click on signature, you will be able to get the parameter details, because we would be playing with the import export parameters. So always if we have a signature, then it is easier for us. Just I am writing a small code, EV underscore param tab IV param 1 IV will not be any errors. Just I have checked and I have activated it. And this SC24 came up with a tool where we can test the respective method here only. So I would like to test this method here. I clicked on this test button, or you can press F8. Here the class name is ZCL ABAP oops 01. It doesn't have any interfaces. We haven't provided any attributes within that. We are with the method add. Rishi, yeah, return will provide a single values, not a group of values like an internal table. Just Rishi has asked a question. We should use return for a single variable or export. For single variable, we should use mostly the return parameter. But here, export, yes, can be used as a, yes, is a nice question. Yes, we can use it for a single value or multiple values. Okay, good. Yeah, so let me come back again. So I would like to execute the add method, IV param, just I am providing some value. 0, 2. So I have provided input parameters and I am executing it here. So the export parameter is 10 right now. Okay, so this is the way how we would be creating a method and we would be providing the import parameters, export